Welcome to Megabucks Radio. Conversations with successful entrepreneurs, sharing their tips and strategies for success. Real-world ideas that can put megabucks in your bank account. Here's your host, Nina Hirschberger.
Well, welcome to today's show. I'm honored to have my guest, Tana Daughtrey. Tana is a lawyer. She practiced in Houston, Texas for 38 years, and the last 31 years, she actually was in the law department for a Fortune 100 oil and gas company. But she retired from that company and has a real passion for attorneys who, as you can imagine, are stressed in many cases. They're under the gun. Things have to get done. They have to be perfect. And so she had a real passion to help those people regain their balance in their life and even their life. Am I saying that right?
You're saying it correctly.
So tell me what attorneys, what is their life really like, and what did you see that you could really help them with?
Generally, the profession is very stressed out. It's a profession that lives from deadline to deadline and usually is brought into a situation where people are not happy. They're in conflict. And because they're in conflict, the attorneys get tied up in the conflict, and therefore the pressure and the conflict, it just causes so much stress to an attorney from the work that they do that they become very stressed out individuals.
Okay. So they have kind of maybe an option. They could hire you or they could go to therapy. So tell me, why would they hire you?
Well, from my standpoint, I look at therapy as being a great option. It's always a good option. I have nothing against therapy at all, but it's more backward looking, and my idea and what I've done is develop this process called the Meltdown Preventative process to use to help look forward from here forward and come up with a resolution or several resolutions that may help alleviate the stress that they're feeling.
So you call it your Meltdown Preventative process. Now, that's very interesting. So tell me, as I understand, it's a 5-step process. Explain it to me. Let's start with step number 1.
Okay, step number 1 is called discovery. And really, that is the time that we set out, and we need to know what the current and foreseeable situation is going to be for them, for the person, for their needs and wants, financially, professionally, and personally. So we take a lot of time to find out what is their current situation before we go then to the next step, which our next step is called opportunities.
Well, I'm going to let's stay. I want to say it's discovery first. I mean, it sounds like a very attorney kind of a word, isn't it?
Yes.
So what you're trying to do is find out, where are they right now? What is their life like? Do they have kids? Are they married? Are they divorced? Are they widowed? Are they single? Are they whatever? How many hours do they work? Is that all part of the discovery? All
part of the discussion. How many days per week do they work? How many hours per day? What do they do? Do they spend some time outside of work, and what do they do with their free hours? We'll call them free hours. And we talk a lot about that. We talk about, when did they last take a vacation day and actually leave the office, not one of those vacation days where you're not in the office but you're working all day.
So I suspect at that point you're starting, even though you're doing a discovery, you're probably saying there really is hope. I mean, That's what they've got to understand. You're going to go through your 5-step process because at the end you're going to find some solutions, but there is hope. They really can have a balanced life. Am I understanding that right?
You are. You're absolutely correct. That the whole idea, Nina, is that we get the individuals to be able to come to a point in their lives where they feel they've decreased the pressure and they feel that balance in their lives between work and being away from work.
Wow. Okay, so you're getting it now. Do you do that in writing? And first, how long does discovery take? Is that a 4-hour process? How long?
I would say it's going to take it takes a couple of hours, good hours, if we're both focused and we're spending time just really answering questions. Now, if we talk a lot, it could take 4 hours.
And does it need to be face-to-face, or is a call, a Zoom call, or a conference line, does that work as well?
So far, I've tried to use Zoom, and it seems to work to me, so I feel comfortable that you can do it in person or over audio or video lines, as long as you're both committed to what you're doing.
Well, obviously, they got to trust you. I mean, You've got 38 years, so you know the deal. You know what they're going through, and it's, I couldn't do that because I've never lived in their shoes. So I suppose the first thing has to be that trust, and it has to be that hope. So you get a discovery. You're looking for what's happening now. So go on to the second step then in the process.
So the second step is called opportunities, but it really is, what can we change? And we want to look broadly at this. What are some different ideas that we can utilize to start to alleviate some of the stress that the person is having? We try to look at, some are going to be short-term. How can we alleviate the stress? And then we're also looking at long-term wants and needs as to what we can do to start to overcome the stress and attain a happier and more satisfying life and career.
It's almost like you must be giving them permission. Permission to say no to some things, permission to let go of some things.
I think you're correct that there's a need, and we get so tied up in our professions, there is a need to be able to say that it is okay. I think you're right.
Well, they might be afraid if they don't spend that 20 hours a day in the office and doing that stuff, they might get fired. They might be passed by for the partner position. Something might happen.
Of course. It's very pressurized, all of that.
And so you're coming in and saying, look, life is short. You have one go around at this. And you have to have a balance to the life, or you're just going to burn out. You're going to melt down, as you would say.
Yes.
Do you find that companies, when a person gets more balance in their life, so in other words, when that attorney is able to take 2 weeks vacation, or when they are able to leave the office at 5:30 in the afternoon instead of 8:30 in the evening, that the companies are okay with that, or really is there that much pressure, or are they putting it on themselves?
Well, there's a general perception and fear within the departments, or that's been my experience from what I've seen and from what I've learned from other departments. There's a prevailing fear that if I don't put in these hours, or if I don't put in this time, then I won't make partner, or I won't make management, depending if it's a law firm versus a law department in a corporation. But most of them are starting to realize that the fact of the matter is a human being is better and more capable if they do have a more balanced life than they are when they are so stressed out as history, most of the attorneys would recognize that they've been under those kinds of pressures themselves. So
in other words, they're putting the pressure on themselves. It's not expected from the companies they're working for?
And I believe in the law firms there's still some pressure to work those kinds of hours. If you go to a major corporation, you may find in the local corporation there are pockets of people who still hold to this old-fashioned, it's almost to me like ruling by a time clock. You've got to put in so many hours, or you've got to be there in the office or online for so many hours per day versus a more balanced lifestyle. But most companies nowadays are at least espousing that they want their people to take their vacations, that they want them to take their time off and not be in the office. So we're hearing more of that in the major corporations, and with time, I think you'll even hear it some from the law firms, but I think there's more stress in the law firms.
So I'm curious. You talked about being a manager or being a partner. Is it ever okay for a lawyer to just simply be a staff lawyer? In other words, not have to, they're not on that path of major success so that they can have some more balance? Is that fair?
Yes. It can occur I know it occurs within the departments, the law departments and corporations, where you don't have to work to attain a management position, that it's okay you can excel in a staff position and still make good money. At least that's what's espoused within the various departments, that's the way it works. And it seems to be working that way better than it did in years past. I saw there seems to be some growth in this area.
Interesting. Well, okay, so the first one is discovery.
Yes.
The second one is visioning. Is that what you said?
Opportunities.
So you're starting to help them paint a picture of what life could be like. Is that a fair description?
That's a fair description. We're starting to go through and come up with a variety of different ways that life can be changed, that they can move toward a happier and more satisfying life. So we come up with as many and as broad options as we can during that second phase of opportunities.
Yeah, give me some examples of some options.
Okay. What we would have is, for instance, let's say we have an attorney who hasn't taken vacation in the last 2.5 years, for example. So one of the things that we would start to do is we come up with options of, okay, he's going to take like an extended vacation to take up his last 2 years' worth of vacations. That'd be one option he could come up with as something to do to alleviate the stress in the short term.
It's almost like a sabbatical is what you're saying, because you're going to take a lot of hours.
Yes.
I would think he'd be afraid that he wouldn't have a job when he came back.
It is. You have to work out. This has to be a negotiated process. Once we get through, we do the options and we come up with as many options as possible. That's kind of what we start doing in the third step, which is called strategize. We start looking at what options are feasible So in some instances, we know we have to start involving third parties, like you may want if taking a long-term sabbatical, or at least a month, 6 weeks, however long they want it to take. If that is one idea they want to follow up on, they might have to go talk to their law firm about it. At this point, we really start to go ahead and strategize on these different options and deciding which ones are feasible and then which ones we are going to bring into our long-term plan of changes we're going to make.
You know, it's been my experience that sometimes people live at a higher level, have a bigger house, have multiple cars, have credit cards because they buy whatever and stuff. Do you ever recommend that they even start reducing some of that? Because if they don't have so much pressure financially, then they don't have so much pressure mentally that they've got to keep up all of this. They have to go up that big path of management and partner and stuff. It's
certainly an area we have to talk about. It's one of the areas that comes up in the first section with discovery, is we have to look at not just what are they spending now, but really wants and needs. They may be living at a very expensive level and they may not need to. They may be willing to cut back. Those kinds of questions need to come up, and they're certainly open for discussion during the strategy, the third section.
Something just popped in my mind. Is there a particular age that seems to be, when they hit their 40 that you work with primarily?
Well, what it seems to me, there's almost like there's two times that people get into different crises, I will call them, or what I've seen so far, and I'm no expert on numbers. Let me tell you, just by the numbers I've seen people who are, like you say, in that age group. They may be in the 35 to 40, 42, in that age group where they're at a very heavy pressure. There's a lot of economic pressure. There's a lot of pressure, family pressure usually, as well as the pressure to make the partnership and to make all that work, or to make management, or just simply to be making enough money in their minds. That hits at one point. There's a second point also that seems to come along. I've seen people that are older that reach a kind of critical point where they just really say, I don't want to do this anymore. Where they literally are, I don't think I can go in and face another day of doing what I'm doing. I've really talked to a dentist who felt like they just couldn't go on another day going back into work. It was just, they felt guilty, they felt bad, they'd spent money on all their educations and everything, and they still had years before retirement, but they were just so burned out. They probably didn't, this is me making speculation. I don't think they recognized the crisis they had in the 35 to 40, and they held on to it until a later date. And then it gets to a critical point where you just are burned out completely.
Yeah, life wasn't fun. They're tired of looking in the mouth of those teeth and stuff. The same thing with an attorney. They're just tired of that kind of pressure. Do you ever see any of the attorneys doing in your coaching with them? Do they ever say, let's pick up a different hobby? Let's pick up a different skill set, something else that gets you excited. You might be like to cook. You might be a chef waiting to happen. Do you do any of that kind of coaching with them?
I definitely have them explore the ideas of all these areas. One of the things that I find on whether men or women is that they haven't taken the time to explore these types of options, whether it's cooking, painting, music of some sort. They may really want to go ahead and do some of these areas, and this is the time for them to start exploring that. So yes, I encourage them to take a look at such areas.
By this time in the process, you've gone through the 3 steps. You got a couple more steps. They must be starting to feel there really is hope. I mean, you get them. You understand it. You say your life can change.
Mm-hmm.
So what is step number 4?
Okay, by the time we get to step number 4, that's when we start implementing changes. It's the implementation phase. So we start making changes. We've discussed in the strategize section, we discussed all the changes. We came up with a plan. We've signed off one to another. These are the changes we're going to make. So now we start on the steps of making these changes. This may literally take, it may be talking to their law firm about taking some time off. It may be starting an art class because they've always wanted to but never thought they had time. It could be a list of 12 different things that we want to, but it's whatever we've agreed on. We have start to implement those, and I'm with them through the implementation phase as well. So step 4.
Well, the beauty about it, every pro athlete has a coach. Every successful business person often will have a coach. So there's nothing different about a lawyer, that they should have somebody. You're a person that is safe. They can tell you all of their frustrations, all of their problems, and you can help guide them through. I can see where that's a real benefit. I mean, most of the time, those of us who are business owners don't have a spouse that works in the business with us. So, I say my husband's really not qualified in many times to talk about that. So you come with those credentials. So how long will an implementation process usually take?
Well, I hate to say it depends. To a degree, it depends on what types of changes these are, but I usually suggest that we are sitting down and looking at this opening phase as taking, if we meet hourly, week to week, that I think I can get through the first 3 phases with pretty much any client in about 6 weeks, and we get to the implementation phase, and then we're really looking at what we're going to do in our steps. I basically allow, this is kind of the way I look at it. I look at implementation, then we spend a certain time after we've implemented, whether it's 3-month period, something like that, for us to have the option to see how everything's working with all the changes once we get them implemented.
So you're saying about 6 weeks to go through the discovery and the visioning and all of that strategizing phase, and then implementation maybe 3 months. So we're talking 4 or 5 months from start to finish kind of thing?
Yes.
So their life could be so much better in 4 to 5 months. All they need to do is take that first step, which is to get a coach like you.
That's it. I'd love it.
What is their objections? Why would they not do this?
again, I think there's a lot of fear of stepping out and making changes. It's very, very, at their age, in the 35 to 40 age group, I think they feel a need still to go ahead and be the kind of attorney that they think the firm wants them to be.
Okay, so they're afraid. They're afraid that it can't happen, that
right.
It would derail their path to success, whatever that definition of success is.
Right.
That they've got so much financial pressure that they just can't take that risk, whatever that is.
Right.
How do you overcome that? Do you have a guarantee at all?
The only thing that I think it's impossible to give them a guarantee. I guarantee I'll be there with them, that I'll work with them and I'll support them. It's up to them to make the changes. They have to ultimately be responsible for their own behavior, but I will be there supporting them, and I will be there for sure as they develop and implement. And then our last step, the one we haven't really gotten to, was review, and that's just to go back and look at where we've been, where we are, and is this far enough? Does this work? Are they happy with where they are, or happier, or more satisfied than where they started? So,
is there any time when you are going to suggest that they really do leave that employment and they go someplace else?
It's a possibility, but that's not the direction we're going. The idea is to work within the confines of their current life and hopefully be able to make some changes based on just what we can do within their current work situation. It can get to where they can leave, but I like to think of it that we work in concert with the law department or the law firm in trying to make sure that the employee is in a balanced and satisfying life, not a stressed out attorney who's about to have a meltdown.
So do you give them a talk track so when they go in to talk to their boss or whatever, that, they know what to say to have success? Or
I work with them, yes. I do work with them if they are having some difficulty on how to talk to their bosses or how to work within the confines of their departments that they're in. I will work with them on coming up with some way to give them a talk track, as you said, come up with some way to talk to them.
Yeah, because they probably think, they're not going to make any changes. Well, this is what I got. I remember years ago when I worked at a corporation, there was a person who worked, came in at 7 o'clock and would work oftentimes till midnight, and there was no reason to do that. That pressure was on themselves. There was no reason to have to do that. Now, they weren't in the law. They weren't an attorney, but it was in a high-profile job. They put it on themselves. So that's why just having you coach them saying, it is okay. You do not have to work those kind of hours. Do you work with any other non-attorneys, somebody else in a different industry? You mentioned a dentist a moment ago.
I have, yes. I am trying to focus on attorneys. That's my direction I'd like to. But the truth is I have taken people in other professions, too, who are suffering from that same type of extreme stress.
So tell me, we should probably start there with it. Tell me your story. Were you able to do this yourself? You were in a very high profile for a Fortune 100 company for 31 years. Did you have those same things and you learned to create that balance yourself? I
went through all of the stages of burnout that a person could go through. I was the person who, during my years, I was so committed to my work, and I did not have children, so I was one of those people. I was married, eventually divorced over work, and my work was my life. That's what I spent my time doing and did very little else. What happened, though, was probably the lesson of my life, and what brought me here was the fact that it had paid off for me for a whole lot of years working hard, but I got to a point that I was no longer capable of working those kind of hours from a literal health standpoint. I was having trouble, gastroenterology kind of troubles, and so I ended up in a situation where I had a boss who wanted me in the office, and I literally could not actually get into the office. And I went through the meltdown, and I went through them not being understanding as I went through the meltdown. And I learned from that. My experience taught me a lot. I ended up leaving the company then.
And so you did survive through that. I mean, that's that was one of the lessons you probably learned.
Yes. I absolutely learned I could survive and also learn and come to a much happier and more satisfying place.
So not only are you a good coach, not only do you understand, but you come from a point where, listen, don't do what I did. You're at the point where that could be happening next for you.
Yes.
And so you actually had to leave the company to regain your health.
I did. I left the company. I was lucky that they finally were able to isolate what the problem was, and it's in remission now. And so it's all turned out to be fine, but it was all brought on by the stress that I was undergoing from work. I had just burned myself out for too many years. I traveled a lot, and worked very hard and exhausted myself on trying to do too many things at one time, to where the last few years of my employment, I was literally exhausted.
Yeah, I mean, our human bodies are not made to be under that kind of pressure for that length of time, for that many hours, for that many years. So at some point, they will have to face it. So they might as well face it on their own terms rather than wait and when there's no turning back because of something that happens. Well, I'm looking at the time, Tana, and so I know we need to wrap up. If somebody listening to this podcast, this radio program, would like to get a hold of you, whether they're an attorney or whether they're in another very high-stress kind of business, can you give them the email? Is that how you'd like them to get a hold of you instead of calling or anything?
Well, I can suggest a couple different ways. I was thinking about it. I can give the email. That's Tana Daughtrey, TanaDaughtrey 220@gmail.com. But you also, I have a profile on LinkedIn, and it has a link where you can book a free call with me if you'd like to book a free call with me to talk about your situation.
So they go to LinkedIn and they just search your name and you'll come up?
It'll come up under my name, and it'll in the About section of my profile, there'll be a link right there that they can use to book a call.
Perfect. So your first name is spelled Tana, last name is D like in dog, Aughtrey, And if you're adding the email, add 220@gmail.com. Well, I appreciate this was a fascinating, there's so many industries, so many people that could use your services because, quite frankly, a lot of them are ready for the meltdown. So I appreciate you taking the time and to being on this radio podcast with me.
Well, Nina, thank you for inviting me on the podcast, and I really appreciate the time.
Yes. All right. Until next time, make sure that you start looking at your life. Is it possible you're facing a meltdown as well?
Thank you for listening to Megabucks Radio with Nina Hirschberger. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show or to listen to past episodes, visit megabucksradio.com.